Liara stood at the edge of the glowing cliffs of Vaelra, the twin suns shining above her like silent witnesses. The crystal plain stretched far below, shining in blue and violet hues that used to fill her heart with pride. Once she had loved this sight. Once it had been her home, her world. Now it was just a reminder of what she had lost. She had been banished. The word echoed again and again in her mind like a cruel whisper. Every step she had taken toward the border gates had been followed by mocking eyes and laughter from her own kind. The council had not even allowed her to defend herself properly. Her actions, they said, were a disgrace to the Vaelran way. Liara had done what she thought was right. She had saved a life. But not a Vaelran life, a human one. 3 lunar cycles ago, a strange ship had crashed near the Silver Forests, torn apart by debris from the asteroid belts. The wreck burned bright for hours before the fire dimmed. When Liara reached the crash site, she had found him, a man wounded, gasping for breath, his blood dark and strange. He was dying. Her people had always told her that outsiders were dangerous, impure, a threat to their purity and traditions. But when she looked into his eyes that night, she had seen only pain, fear, and the same desire to live that existed in every living thing. So she had saved him. She carried him back to her lab, tended to his wounds, and even used the healing serums forbidden for non-Vaelrans. The man had lived. He had smiled at her, a weak, grateful smile that felt more honest than anything she had seen from her own people in years. But when the council found out, everything changed. Contaminated, they called her. Traitor, they whispered. Outcast, they declared. Liara remembered standing in the great hall, the crystal floor reflecting her trembling hands. The elders had looked down at her from their shining thrones. You saved a lesser creature, said High Elder Varen, his voice like cold steel. You placed a stranger's life above your own kin. You are no longer Vaelran. Her voice had cracked as she tried to speak. He was dying. He meant no harm. Mercy is not a weakness, but her words were drowned by laughter. Mercy is for those who can afford it, Varen said sharply. You will leave this place and never return. The guards dragged her through the streets while the crowd jeered. Some threw stones. Others spat words sharper than knives. Go live with your alien pet, they shouted. And now here she was, and at the edge of everything she had ever known. The wind blew through her silver hair, carrying the scent of the desert that waited beyond. She could see the faint shimmer of the force barrier that marked the end of the city. Beyond it lay exile. Liara clutched the small pack slung over her shoulder. Inside were only a few things: a small bottle of water, some dried herbs, and a data crystal containing her research. Everything else had been taken. Her status, her home, her dignity. She looked back one last time. The domed city glowed under the twin suns, beautiful and cold. She had once believed her people were wise, that they were advanced in both knowledge and spirit. Now she saw how wrong she had been. Tears rolled down her pale cheeks as she stepped through the barrier. The air outside felt heavier, drier. The world seemed to grow silent, as if mourning her departure. Maybe, somewhere out there, she whispered, someone will understand. The suns began to set, painting the sky in gold and red. Liara walked into the wastelands alone, her boots sinking into the shifting sands. The heat stung her face, but she didn't stop. She had nothing left to lose. Each step took her farther from the cruelty of her world and closer to the unknown. She didn't know where she would go, or if she would even survive the night. But in her heart, a small spark of hope remained. Fragile, flickering but alive. Perhaps beyond the sands and stars, there existed a place where compassion was not punished. Perhaps somewhere, someone would see that kindness was not weakness. Liara kept walking, and though she did not yet know it, her journey was about to cross paths with a creature her people feared most, a human, the one who would change everything. The desert stretched endlessly before Liara. The ground shimmered like molten glass beneath the twin suns. Each step she took sent small clouds of dust swirling around her boots. Her once pristine robe was torn and dull, and her skin, normally a soft pale blue, had begun to crack from the heat. Days had passed since her exile, though time had lost meaning. The suns rose and fell, yet the world looked the same, an endless sea of sand and silence. Her throat burned, her lips were dry, and her water had run out 2 nights ago. Every breath hurt. She tried to stay strong. She was a scientist, trained to survive, to reason, to adapt. But out here, logic meant nothing. Survival belonged to those who still had hope, and hope was fading fast. Each night, Liara looked at the stars, the same stars she had studied from her observatory. She remembered naming them, mapping them, dreaming of distant worlds. But now those same stars looked like cold eyes watching her suffer. On the fourth night, a sandstorm hit. She tried to find shelter behind a ridge, but the wind roared with a fury that felt almost alive. The sand cut her skin like blades, and her eyes filled with dust. She screamed into the storm, her voice lost to the howling winds. When the storm passed, she was on her knees, shaking, half buried in sand. Her body was weak, her mind dizzy. She could barely think. She looked up at the dark sky, whispering to no one. Why did I save him? If this is my end? Her words broke apart into sobs. She curled up, hugging her knees, trying to protect herself from the cold night wind. Memories of the human she had saved returned to her. His voice, his pain, his gratitude. She remembered his eyes, so strange yet so alive. He had looked at her not as a creature but as a person. He had smiled through the pain, whispering words she hadn't understood at the time. But she remembered his tone, gentle, thankful. That small moment of kindness had been the only warmth in her life for so long. Now she was alone again, lost in a world that had turned its back on her. For 3 more days, she wandered without direction. Her legs trembled with each step. The suns burned hotter, and her shadow grew shorter with each passing hour. Her vision began to blur. Shapes danced before her eyes. Sometimes she thought she heard voices calling her name, Liara, but when she turned there was nothing. Only the endless desert. At last her strength gave out. She fell to her knees and collapsed onto the hot sand. Her heart pounded weakly and her breath came in shallow gasps. As her vision dimmed, she thought she saw movement in the sky. A dark shape cutting across the blinding light of the suns. It moved fast, too fast to be a bird or a storm cloud. Her cracked lips parted. A ship? It was small, silver, and old-looking, human-made. She could tell by its uneven shape, its clumsy thrusters. But it was real. Liara raised a trembling hand, trying to signal, but her arm fell limp. Her eyes fluttered shut. For a few seconds, everything went still. Then, faintly, she heard a low hum overhead, the sound of engines descending. The sand shifted beneath her as the wind from the landing thrusters pushed outward. A door opened with a hiss. Heavy footsteps approached. She tried to open her eyes, but she was too weak. She only heard a voice, a deep, rough voice unlike any she had heard before. Hey, are you alive? The voice was close now. She felt something touch her shoulder. Gentle, careful. Don't worry, the voice said softly. You're safe now. I've got you. Those were the last words she heard before everything went dark. For the first time since her exile, Liara's body felt weightless. She drifted between consciousness and dreams, sensing warmth for the first time in weeks. Somewhere inside, a thought flickered. Maybe mercy wasn't punished everywhere, maybe somewhere in the stars, kindness still mattered. And as the ship lifted from the sands, carrying her broken body away, the universe silently turned a page in her story. The moment a banished alien crossed paths with a human who would change her life forever. Liara woke to the steady hum of engines and the faint scent of metal and oil. For a long time, she didn't move. Her body ached, her throat felt dry like dust, and her vision was blurry. Slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim light. She was lying on a narrow bed inside what looked like a small human ship. The walls were dented and scratched. Wires hung loosely and blinking panels glowed weakly in the dark. It was nothing like the smooth, shining technology of her people, but there was warmth here, a strange kind of comfort. Her gaze shifted and she saw him. A human sat nearby, leaning back in an old pilot's chair. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face rough with stubble, and his brown hair messy. His clothes were simple, a worn flight jacket and boots covered in dust. But what caught her attention most were his eyes. They were soft, calm, and filled with concern. When he noticed her stirring, he smiled faintly. "Hey," he said in a deep, gentle voice. "Easy there. You're safe now." Liara blinked in confusion. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. The human was quick to help, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Careful," he said. "You've been out for a while. Dehydration, heat stroke. You're lucky I found you when I did." His voice was rough, yet there was kindness in every word. It felt strange to her, this tone. Her own people had only spoken to her with cold judgment, but this human sounded sincere. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Who are you? He smiled a little. Name's Elias, Captain Elias Grant, cargo runner for the Terran Free Fleet. Or what's left of it. Elias, she repeated softly, T. He named foreign, but somehow pleasant to say. He handed her a small cup of water. Here, sip slowly. Liara hesitated for a moment, then drank. The cool liquid soothed her throat instantly. She closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to fall. It had been so long since anyone had shown her even the smallest kindness. Elias studied her quietly. You're not from around here, huh? She looked down at her hands, her blue skin faintly glowing under the ship's lights. No, she said weakly. My world is far from this place, he chuckled softly. Yeah, I figured. You don't exactly look like someone from Mars Station. Something in his voice made her smile despite herself. I am Vailran, she said quietly. Or I was, his brow furrowed. Was? Liara's smile faded. My people. They cast me out. I helped a human once. It was forbidden. They called me traitor. Elias was silent for a moment. Then he let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. That's rough. I'm sorry, she looked at him in surprise. You are sorry for me? Yeah, he said simply. No one deserves that for doing the right thing. Her eyes softened. Those words, so plain yet so powerful, hit her harder than anything she'd heard in years. He didn't ask for details. He didn't question her motives. He just understood. For a long while they sat in silence. The sound of the engines filled the space between them, soft and steady. Finally, Elias spoke again. You said you saved a human before, right? Liara nodded slowly. Yes, his ship crashed near my city. I treated his wounds, kept him alive. But my people found out. They said I had contaminated our purity. Elias frowned, shaking his head. Purity, that's nonsense. Sounds like fear to me. She looked at him, confused. Fear? Yeah, he said. People fear what they don't understand. They build walls around their hearts and call it safety. His words lingered in her mind. They were simple, but they carried truth. Maybe her people weren't strong like they claimed. Maybe they were just afraid. Elias stood and adjusted a few controls on the console. You're free to rest here as long as you need. Food's in the storage locker, bed's yours. I'll figure out where to drop you once you're better. Liara hesitated before asking softly, Why? Why help me? You don't even know me. Elias paused, then gave her a small, tired smile. Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it either. Her heart tightened at those words. She didn't know this man, but somehow she trusted him. His kindness was raw and real, something her people had long forgotten. As he turned to leave, she whispered faintly, Thank you. Elias. He looked back, meeting her gaze with a gentle smile. You're welcome, Liara. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like an outcast. She felt seen. Days passed aboard Elias's ship, and Liara slowly began to heal. The small metal vessel was nothing like the grand halls of Vailra, yet it felt more like home than her world ever had. There was no judgment here, no whispers, no cruel eyes, only the quiet hum of the engines and the calm voice of one human who treated her like an equal. At first, she stayed silent, shy and uncertain. She watched Elias as he worked, repairing panels, adjusting coordinates, and talking softly to the ship's AI as if it were a friend. Sometimes he caught her staring and gave her that same gentle smile. You'll burn a hole in me if you keep looking like that, he joked one day. She didn't understand the joke, but the warmth in his tone made her smile. Slowly, she started asking questions, one about humans, their worlds, their ways of living. Elias always answered, sometimes with stories that made her laugh, other times with truths that made her eyes fill with tears. One night, while the ship drifted through the silent dark, Elias played her something strange, soft music from Earth. The sound was gentle and full of emotion. Liara sat near the console, her hands folded, listening in silence. What is this? She asked softly. He smiled. It's called a lullaby. Humans sing it to help children sleep. It sounds sad, she said. He nodded. Sometimes sadness helps you rest. It reminds you that pain doesn't last forever. Liara looked at him, her heart tightening. No Vailran would ever admit such weakness, yet here he was. Open, honest, unashamed. Humans were supposed to be chaotic, violent, primitive. But Elias, he was something different. Over time they grew closer. She began helping him with the ship, learning how to navigate, repair minor systems, and even cook. Her hands, once used for delicate scientific instruments, now worked beside his on grease-covered tools. Elias was patient, teaching her with quiet humor and endless understanding. One evening, she found him staring at an old hologram, a group of humans smiling beside a large blue ocean. "Your family?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes soft. "Yeah, that was Earth. Before the wars. Before we lost it." Liara tilted her head. "You lost your world?" He exhaled slowly. "Not lost. Just broken. We had everything, oceans, forests, cities that touched the sky. But we fought too much, forgot what mattered. Now humans wander the stars looking for a home we already destroyed." His voice cracked slightly at the end. Liara felt something stir inside her. Sadness, but also admiration. Her people had called humans reckless, but maybe their chaos came from caring too much. "You still hope," she said quietly. "Even after losing everything." Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's what humans do best. We keep walking even when the road ends." His words stayed with her long after he'd gone to sleep. She found herself looking at him differently now. Not as a strange outsider, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose a world, to be rejected, to be alone. One night, as she helped him fix a damaged navigation panel, she asked, "Elias, do you ever regret helping me?" He looked up, surprised. "Regret it? Not for a second." "Why?" She hesitated. "My people. They said humans bring ruin wherever they go. They said you twist mercy into power." Elias chuckled softly. "Yeah, we've done some bad things. No denying that. But we also build, heal, and protect. Sometimes we break things because we're still learning how to care." Liara smiled faintly at that. "That sounds very human," he grinned. "Yeah, it does." Later, when he fell asleep in the pilot's chair, she sat quietly, watching the stars through the viewport. For the first time since her exile, she didn't feel empty. Elias's words, his laughter, his quiet strength. They had filled something inside her that she thought was gone forever. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Maybe this is what mercy was meant to be. Not weakness, but love." The ship glided through the dark, its engines humming like a heartbeat. Two souls, one banished, one broken, drifting together through the endless stars. And though neither of them said it aloud, both felt it deep inside. The fragile, growing bond between a human and an alien who had both lost their worlds, yet somehow found each other. Weeks passed, and Liara's strength returned completely. The color came back to her cheeks and the light returned to her eyes. Life aboard Elias's small cargo ship had become something peaceful, something she had never known before. Every morning began with the smell of warm coffee and the quiet rhythm of the engines. Every night ended with laughter, soft music, or quiet talks beneath the stars. But one morning, as the stars shifted outside the viewport, a sharp alarm broke the calm. Elias jumped from his seat and rushed to the control panel. "Distress signal," he muttered, scanning the data. "Looks like a transport ship in trouble near Vailrun space." Liara froze. "Vailrun space?" Her voice trembled slightly. "That's my people." Elias turned to her. "Coordinates match the outer mining colonies. Massive ion storm incoming. If we don't move fast, everyone on that ship is done for." She shook her head, panic and pain flashing across her face. "We can't. If they see me, they'll know who I am. I'll be arrested or worse." Elias gave her a long look, his brown eyes filled with determination. "You helped a human once, even when it cost you everything. I think it's time humanity returned the favor." Liara's throat tightened. "You'd risk your life for them?" "The same ones who mocked me." He smiled faintly. "I'd risk my life for you." The words struck her heart like a pulse of warmth and pain all at once. Before she could speak, Elias was already setting the coordinates. The ship turned toward the storm, the stars vanishing behind dark clouds of electric dust. As they entered the chaos, lightning flashed across the viewports. The entire vessel shuddered violently. Alarms screamed as energy spikes hit the hull. Elias gripped the controls tightly. "Hang on," he shouted. Liara held the console for support, her heart racing. Through the chaos, she could just barely see the faint glow of another ship, a massive Vailrun transport, spinning helplessly in the storm. "It's them," she cried. "Their stabilizers are offline." "Then we'll fix that," Elias said, eyes focused. "You know their systems better than anyone." Can you guide me? She nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. Yes, follow my lead. Together they worked side by side. Liara's fingers danced across the control panels, shouting out directions. Elias reacted instantly, piloting the small cargo ship like a hawk through the roaring storm. Pieces of metal debris shot past. Lightning cracked in every direction, but still they pushed forward. When they finally reached the Vaelran ship, it was clear how bad the situation was. The hull was ripped open, fire burning inside the oxygen vents, hundreds of lives trapped inside. They're going to lose pressure, Liara said desperately. Elias nodded. Then we'll get them out. He activated the docking sequence, slamming the small cargo ship against the transport's airlock. The impact nearly threw them both to the floor. The lights flickered, but the seal held. Elias grabbed his suit. Stay here. I'll go in and— No, Liara interrupted, shaking her head. I'm coming with you. He hesitated, meeting her eyes. In them he saw the same fire she had when she told him about saving that first human. He gave a small smile. All right, let's bring your people home. The airlock hissed open. The heat hit them like a wall. The corridor beyond was filled with smoke, fire, and frightened faces. Vaelran citizens gasped when they saw her. Liara, one of them whispered in disbelief. You came back? She didn't answer. She just grabbed the nearest injured person and helped them toward safety. Elias followed close behind, carrying others out. The ship creaked and shook as the storm outside tore at its hull. For hours they worked together, human and alien, side by side. Fear and hatred were forgotten in the fight to survive. When the last group was finally safe aboard Elias's ship, the storm reached its peak. A blinding light filled the sky, and a deep rumble shook everything. Elias looked up at the monitors and what the reactor in the Vaelran ship was overloading. Damn it, he hissed. That thing's gonna blow. Liara's eyes widened in horror. There are still engineers trapped in the core. Elias looked at her. Then we go back, she shook her head. No, you've done enough. Let me— He grabbed her arm firmly. We're doing this together. The storm roared louder as they stepped back toward the dying ship, their figures disappearing into smoke and fire. Liara had once lost her home for saving a life. Now she was risking everything again, not for a stranger, but for the man who had shown her what mercy truly meant. And in that moment, she realized something. The universe had a strange way of bringing things full circle. The heat was unbearable. Smoke curled around Liara's legs as she ran through the corridors of the stricken Vaelran transport. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and the metal floor shuddered beneath her boots. She could hear screams and alarms echoing through the burning ship. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. Follow me, Elias shouted from ahead. He was helping two engineers toward the emergency exit, his muscles straining under the weight of their combined bodies. His jacket was scorched in places, but he didn't slow down. Liara's chest tightened as she saw the fire spreading faster than she had thought possible. Oxygen vents hissed and groaned, flames licking through the hallways. She had never seen destruction like this. Even on Vaelra, this chaos was unimaginable. Keep going, Elias barked, his voice urgent but steady. We're almost there. Liara helped a young technician with a broken leg, holding her up as they ran. She could feel the heat searing her skin, sweat stinging her eyes. Every step felt heavier, but she couldn't stop. Not when people were depending on them. They reached a wide chamber near the reactor. Inside, engineers worked frantically to stabilize the core. Sparks flew violently from the failing systems, and the air was thick with smoke. Liara recognized the equipment. She had studied these systems during her time on the council. She could guide them, she realized. Elias, she called out, her voice hoarse.
They need help here.
He nodded, glancing back. I'll cover them. You get them safe. She hesitated. He shouldn't be putting himself in more danger. He had already risked so much to help her and her people. But she didn't have time to think. She rushed into the chamber, barking orders, helping stabilize the machinery, and lifting unconscious crew members toward the exit. Then she saw him. Elias was pinned under a fallen metal beam, blood streaking his forehead. His arm was trapped beneath the wreckage, and the heat of the room made the air unbearable. Elias, she screamed, rushing to him. Go! Save them, he gasped, sweat and blood mixing on his face. I'll be fine. You're not fine, she shouted, her voice cracking. I can't leave you here. With all her strength, Liara lifted the beam, her muscles trembling, pain shooting through her body. Elias gritted his teeth but pushed the last engineers out of the chamber. Smoke choked them both, and the reactor alarm screamed louder. "Just a little more," Liara cried, her hands raw and burning. Finally, with a heave and a yell, she freed him. Elias collapsed against her, coughing, his face covered in soot and sweat. They stumbled toward the exit together, carrying anyone they could still save. Behind them, the ship groaned ominously. Liara knew the reactor wouldn't last long. Every second mattered. The last few engineers made it to the cargo ship, and Elias pulled the ramp closed just as the main core reached critical overload. A massive explosion shook the Veilran transport. Flames and debris shot into space, the shock wave rocking both vessels. Liara clung to Elias as the cargo ship trembled violently, her heart racing. When the chaos finally subsided, they were safe, though battered and burned. Liara looked at him, her chest heaving, tears streaking her soot-covered face. You risked everything," she whispered. Elias gave her a weak, tired smile. "We did it together. You saved as many as I did." Liara shook her head. "No, you saved me. Again." He reached out, brushing the hair from her face. "You saved me too. Remember that." For the first time, Liara understood the truth of his words. Mercy and courage were not measured by rank, by species, or by power. They were measured by action, by the willingness to step into danger for another soul. And in that moment, surrounded by smoke, fire, and the faint hum of the engines, Liara realized she had found more than survival. She had found something rare and beautiful: trust, respect, and a bond that no fire, no storm, and no exile could ever break. They had saved lives together, and in saving others, they had saved each other. The storm had passed. The first light of Veilra's twin suns crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the dunes. The Veilran colony transport, now stabilized, hovered safely in orbit beside Elias's small cargo ship. Smoke still curled from its damaged hull, but the survivors were alive. Liara stood at the edge of the landing platform, her body bruised, her clothing scorched, but her heart full. Around her, the Veilran engineers and colonists stared in awe. Many had once mocked her, called her a traitor, even spat at her name. Now their eyes were wide with disbelief, respect, and for some, shame. An elder approached her, his tall form rigid, his crystal blue eyes hard but thoughtful. "Liara, you came back for us," he said quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze toward Elias, who stood a few steps behind her, leaning on the railing, his face smeared with soot, his brown eyes warm despite the exhaustion. "It wasn't just me," she said softly. "It was both of us. Without him, many of you wouldn't be alive today." The elder's shoulders sank slightly and he lowered his gaze. For the first time, Liara saw humility in him. A recognition that they had been wrong, that they had underestimated both mercy and the strength of a human. Elias stepped forward, brushing ash from his jacket. "You all survived," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That's what matters. I don't care who's Veilran, human or otherwise. Life is worth saving." The crowd of colonists murmured among themselves, some nodding, some whispering apologies. Liara felt a sense of relief and sadness intertwine. Her people had been blinded by tradition, but perhaps this act of courage would open their eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, taking in the warmth of the suns, the smell of scorched metal, and the hum of the ships. She had survived exile, desert, storms, and fire, and now she had proven that compassion was stronger than fear, that mercy was stronger than mockery. She turned to Elias, a soft smile spreading across her face. You saved more than lives today. You saved my heart too." He chuckled quietly, brushing his hand over her shoulder. "And you reminded me why it's worth risking everything." In the days that followed, news of their bravery spread through the Veilran colonies. Stories were told of the banished scientist who defied her people, and the human captain who crossed the stars to help. Songs were sung, tales were written, and a new respect grew for both humans and Veilrans who chose mercy over pride. Liara did not return to the council. She no longer wished to reclaim a title that had been poisoned by jealousy and fear. Instead, she traveled with Elias, visiting colonies in need, helping the injured, and teaching both species the value of understanding one another. The two of them became a legend, a symbol of courage, hope, and the idea that one person, or even one human, could change the course of many lives. Children would grow up hearing their story, not as a tale of war or conquest, but as a tale of kindness that bridged worlds. One evening, aboard the cargo ship, Liara looked out at the stars. The void seemed endless, but for the first time it felt like home. Elias sat beside her, holding a small cup of water. They shared a quiet moment, watching distant suns shimmer, comfortable in each other's presence. "You ever think about going back?" Elias asked softly. Liara shook her head. "There's nothing for me there anymore. My home is out here, with those who care more about life than tradition." He nodded, smiling. "Then let's keep moving forward. There's a lot of universe left to save." And together, they did, because the universe, vast and endless, remembered the day a human saved a banished alien, and in doing so, reminded two species that courage, kindness, and mercy were the greatest powers of all. Liara had been mocked, cast out, and abandoned. Yet in the end, she had discovered that compassion could not only save lives, it could change the